A steel coffin locked around your skull, slowly filling with blood while you suffocate in full view of a cheering crowd. That was the frogmouth helm in its final, fatal act. The jousting helmet designed for ultimate protection had a flaw so specific, so brutally efficient, it turned the sport of kings into a death trap. A direct lance hit to the vision slit could drive a splinter through the eye and into the brain. But the real horror was the helmet's weight distribution. When a knight was unhorsed and lay flat on his back, the helmet's sheer mass pinned his head to the ground, while the narrow, downward-angled vision slit channeled every drop of blood from a broken nose directly into his lungs. You drowned in your own blood, fully conscious, unable to move. From samurai warlords decapitated by their own crests to German infantry impaled on their own regalia, the history of head protection is a catalog of self-inflicted wounds. How does a helmet designed to save your life become the very thing that ends it? What engineering oversights turn a piece of armor into an instrument of suicide? Today, 8 medieval and early modern helmets that killed their own wearers. Starting with a design so brutally simple, its failure was guaranteed by geometry alone. Before we start, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe so you don't miss which failure takes the #1 spot. Great helm with cross-shaped eye slit. By the mid-13th century, the great helm had become the defining symbol of the knightly class across Western Europe. It was a brutally simple design, a steel cylinder flattened on top, pierced only by a pair of narrow horizontal vision slits and a few ventilation holes punched into the lower faceplate. Protection was absolute for the era, but the flat top absorbed the full kinetic energy of a downward blow, transmitting it directly to the skull and neck. Armorers understood the problem. They began curving the top into a conical sugar loaf shape to deflect blows, and they added a vertical ridge down the center of the faceplate. This ridge stiffened the plate and encouraged a lance point to skid sideways, rather than catch and punch through. But a parallel design choice turned a structural improvement into a deadly liability. Many knights, particularly in the Crusader states and the Iberian Peninsula, commissioned faceplates with the vision slit and reinforcing ridge fused into a single cross-shaped opening. The vertical slot crossed the horizontal eye slit at the bridge of the nose, forming a stark Latin cross over the wearer's face. The intent was talismanic, a warrior sealed inside a dark iron box, riding into a storm of arrows and lance strikes, saw that cross as divine protection, a prayer forged in steel between his eyes and the enemy. The engineering reality was catastrophic. A cross-shaped cutout in a steel plate concentrates stress at the 4 internal corners of the intersection. Under a direct hit, cracks propagate from those sharp right angles. More immediately, the widened vertical slot created a funnel. An arrow striking the face did not need to find the narrow horizontal slit. The vertical channel guided the arrowhead downward, the edges of the cross catching the broad head and directing it straight back into the nasal cavity and brain. A standard vision slit, 9 to 12 millimeters wide and set close to the eyes to minimize parallax, already restricted peripheral vision to a pair of narrow horizontal bands. The cross-shaped slit removed the thin bridge of steel that separated the 2 eye openings, widening the gap and exposing the most vulnerable point on the face to a precisely guided penetration. What was intended as a symbol of faith became a structural trap, a geometric invitation for an arrow to find the wearer's skull. The cross-shaped great helm persisted for decades, a testament to the medieval willingness to trade physical safety for spiritual assurance. Eventually, the design was abandoned as faceplate construction matured, and the bassinet with its removable visor rendered the great helm obsolete for war. Japanese kabuto with overly elaborate mayadate. In the 16th century, during the Sengoku period, Japan descended into total civil war. Massed infantry armies armed with Tanegashima matchlocks made the old aristocratic armor obsolete. The new Tosei Gusoku harness was simpler, made from 3 or 4 large iron plates, and could be mass-produced. But the battlefield became a sea of identical helmets. A daimyo, or a high-ranking commander, needed to be seen instantly by his own troops. The solution was the mayadate, a frontal crest mounted on the kabuto. These crests exploded in size.
Some were fashioned from lacquered wood or papier-mâché over a wooden armature shaped into meter-wide horns, stylized antlers called kuwagat, giant hoe blades, or sculpted sun discs. The physical principle at play here is leverage. A crest standing half a meter tall and nearly as wide acts as a long lever arm attached to the wearer's head.
Any lateral strike to that crest, even a glancing one from a yari spear or a sword, multiplies the force applied to the helmet bowl and the neck. The torque snaps the wearer's cervical spine, or simply rips the kabuto clean off the head, leaving the commander bareheaded in a melee. The second problem was aerodynamic drag. A samurai fighting from horseback relied on the yumi, an asymmetrical longbow. Drawing and aiming required a stable upper body. A massive crest catching the wind made the rider's head a weather vane, jerking it sideways with every gust and making accurate archery nearly impossible. The irony is that these crests were often made from lightweight materials like molded paper and lacquer, specifically for safety reasons on the battlefield. But the sheer surface area still made them deadly. The tradition of giant medate peaked in the Azuchi Momoyama period and then retreated into the ceremonial excess of the peaceful Edo period, where helmets became pure sculpture. The battlefield lesson was clear. Visibility came at the cost of a broken neck. Frog-mouth helm, steck helm. Emerging around the year 1400, this helmet was purpose-built for the joust, not the battlefield. Its defining feature was a protruding, frog-like face that sloped forward, designed to deflect lance strikes. The eye slit sat high on the forehead, not in front of the eyes. When a rider leaned forward in the charge, he could see through it. But at the moment of impact, jousting technique demanded he straighten up and pull his head back. This tilted the helmet downward, and the slit rose above his line of sight. Suddenly, the wearer was blind, staring at solid steel. The reasoning was simple. A shattered lance throws splinters, and eyes are soft. Better to sacrifice vision for a split second than lose an eye. The helm weighed up to 10 kilograms and was bolted directly to the cuirass, so the head could not turn. Ventilation came only from the few holes for the leather liner's cords. Underneath, a thick padded cowl absorbed concussive blows, but the rigid neck guard meant the helmet could only be removed by lifting it straight up. In a tournament, this was acceptable. In war, it was suicidal. An infantryman at waist height was completely invisible. The rider could not see below his own chest. The helm's single-piece construction, or later hinged variants, offered superb protection against a frontal lance, but zero awareness of anything else. As jousting declined in the late 16th century, the frog-mouth helm vanished with it, a purebred sporting tool that had no place outside the lists. Mine, Italian barbute with T-face opening. In 1407, the Gonzaga family of Mantua recorded the first barbute in their inventory. This 15th century Italian infantry helmet was forged from a single sheet of metal, its sides extending forward to protect the cheeks and ears. The defining feature? A T-shaped opening for the eyes and mouth, often reinforced with a riveted iron rim. The design gave excellent visibility and breathing, but that T-shaped cutout was a structural invitation for an enemy blade. A thrust aimed at the center of the T found a perfect alignment guide. The vertical slot led straight down to the nose and throat. The horizontal crossbar exposed the eyes. The edge of the opening, even when reinforced, could not deflect a direct stab. The iron rim itself became a track that channeled the point inward rather than glancing it off. The result was catastrophic. A single well-placed thrust split the face, piercing the nasal cavity or the windpipe. The helmet's elegant form, praised for its functional beauty, became a death trap in close combat. By the end of the 15th century, the barbute was largely abandoned, replaced by the sallet with its more protective visor. Spangenhelm with exposed nasal and chainmail aventail gap. By the 6th century, the Spangenhelm was the most common helmet design in Europe. Its segmented construction, a framework of metal strips riveted to plates, made it relatively easy for a village smith to produce. It was an effective defense against a slashing blow to the top of the skull. The problem was not the helmet itself, but the false confidence it gave the wearer about the protection of his face and throat. The design featured a metal nasal bar extending down from the brow and often a chainmail aventail hanging from the back and sides. This left a critical vulnerability. The nasal bar was a rigid piece of iron directly in front of the wearer's nose. A downward angled axe blow sliding off the conical dome would be caught and funneled by this bar straight into the wearer's mouth and upper jaw. The bar that protected the nose became a guide rail for the enemy's weapon, directing the blade's force into the teeth and palate. The second lethal flaw was the gap between the helmet's rim and the chainmail aventail. The mail did not seal against the helmet, it hung loose. A rising thrust from a spear or sword could slip under the rim, bypass the mail entirely, and enter the soft tissue of the throat. The wearer had a steel shell on his head and iron rings on his shoulders, but a direct path to his windpipe was left completely open. Vikings and other experienced warriors learned to exploit these gaps with brutal efficiency. A man in a Spangen helm was protected from a wild overhead chop, but he was horrifyingly exposed to a precise angled strike or a simple upward stab. The helmet's partial coverage turned a survivable blow into a fatal one. Maximilian armor helmet with fluted grooves. By the early 16th century, German armorers had perfected a style of plate armor that looked like pleated fabric. Emperor Maximilian I, who reigned from 1493 to 1519, lent his name to this fluted armor, though the classic form appeared around 1515 to 1525. The helmet, often a close helm or armet with a bellows visor, was covered in narrow parallel grooves. These flutes were not just decoration, they increased the rigidity of the steel, much like corrugation strengthens a sheet of metal. But that same geometry created a fatal flaw. The channels acted as guide rails for an incoming lance or sword point. Instead of deflecting a thrust, the fluting funneled the tips straight toward the eye slits or the neck joint. A precisely aimed blow would slide along the groove and punch through the gap with terrifying ease. The very feature that made the armor stiff and fashionable turned it into a ballistic funnel. Armorers like Valentin Siebenberger of Nuremberg produced at least 36 such harnesses, many now in museums. The wearer paid for elegance with a direct path to his throat. The fluted armor was gradually abandoned by the mid-16th century as combat tactics shifted and its lethal geometry became apparent. French Adrian helmet with comb crest. By 1915, millions of French soldiers were hunkered in trenches, and head wounds from air-bursting shrapnel had become a crisis. The old kepi cloth cap offered zero protection. Intendant General Louis Adrian designed a solution. His helmet was a bowl of mild steel weighing just 0.765 kilograms. It was the first modern steel combat helmet, and its most distinctive feature was a raised metal comb running front to back along the skull dome. This crest covered a ventilation slit, and its design deliberately echoed the heroic military paintings of Édouard de Tillet, a direct attempt to boost troop morale through aesthetics. The psychological trick worked. Soldiers loved the look. But the physical design introduced a fatal flaw. The helmet was never meant to stop a direct bullet. Its job was to shield against shrapnel raining down from above. The problem was that the ornamental crest created a perfect structural trap for exactly that shrapnel. The crest was formed by two angled walls of mild steel meeting at a peak, with the open ventilation slot sitting directly underneath at the highest point of the wearer's head. When a fast-moving fragment struck the crest, it often didn't glance off. Instead, the thin metal folded inward, and the impact's kinetic energy drove the entire comb down through the ventilation hole like a wedge. The metal crest, designed to raise a man's spirits, transformed into a spike being hammered directly into his skull. The slot that was supposed to vent hot air became a pre-made entry wound. A hit that might have merely concussed a soldier wearing a smooth dome could, on an Adrian helmet, become a penetrating skull fracture. The very feature that modern researchers believe deflects blast waves so well was a liability against solid projectiles. Over 20 million helmets were produced, and the design saved countless lives. But for a handful of unlucky men, their protective shell's crowning detail became the instrument of their death. German Pickelhaube with spike. In 1842, the Prussian army adopted a new leather helmet crowned with a polished brass spike. The design aimed to deflect vertical sword strikes, a relic of Napoleonic cavalry charges. By 1914, this thinking was obsolete. The spike, a gleaming lightning rod, turned soldiers into targets. In trench warfare, snipers scanned for the glint of brass fittings. The metal trim, originally plated with gold or silver for officers, reflected even the faintest light. A soldier raising his head above the parapet gave away his position instantly. The spike also snagged on barbed wire, trapping men in no man's land. Crawling under fire became impossible. The helmet's high profile, though reduced over decades of weight saving, still made the wearer a visible silhouette. Artillery units had already switched to a ball-shaped finial in 1844 after spikes injured horses and damaged equipment. But for the infantry, the spike remained. In 1892, a cloth cover was issued to reduce visibility, but it was often discarded or torn. The underlying brass still shone through. Thousands died before the steel Stahlhelm replaced it in 1916. Medieval helmet design was a brutal lesson in trade-offs. Protect the skull, sacrifice the neck, or simply create a death trap. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Drop your idea for the next episode in the comments.